The fat hands have returned. All right, you're looking even more Swedish at the moment.
Good.
But in
It's the Viking beard.
The future of music.
The future of music. The future of music.
The future of music.
The future of music.
The Future of Music podcast.
What is up and happening, folks? That's as cool as it gets. It is Ryan Withrow here. I've got Jonathan Boyd, and we are here with the Future of Music podcast, where we show you how to survive and thrive in the future of music. John, yet again, you're somewhere else. Where the heck are you now? Like, where have you turned up at this point in the world?
Well, right now I'm in this room, and this room is actually in Stockholm. I'm in Sweden, and the ceiling is a little slanted. That's actually not the computer. That's actually the room. So the whole room is a little crooked here. So it's kind of fun.
Intentional? Is that like Swedish engineering? What is that? I don't even know.
I think that's maybe Swedish engineering like 500 years ago. Kind of settles in after a while, you know?
Yeah, like a fine wine. It's the building
Right,
has
it gets
to
crooked.
settle in. Yeah, it's got to settle in so you have like the appropriate amount of danger.
Exactly.
Is really perfect.
That's
Excellent.
a good album name, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, we've got a lot of album names at this point on this one. Now we just need to figure out the music, I guess. But considering we need the music, let's talk about music things today. We have a few things to discuss. We're gonna hit some of the top focused news points of this past week, but specifically, what are we talking about? What should they be excited about?
Yeah, so today's actually really interesting. We've been talking a lot about this whole AI movement and how a lot of the population actually seem to be kind of scared of it. It's this new big thing. People are wondering if it's going to take their jobs, if it's going to take over. And now we're actually already starting to see some regulation and big companies stepping in, and even the White House, which we're going to talk about later, kind of stepping in to say, okay, what should we do about this? How can we maybe not only control it, but how do we at least manage this and regulate it, make sure that it doesn't get out of hand? So one of the things that we're going to hit on today is about how bigger companies and just in general AI generated content and some of the risks around that, how do they actually track that stuff, and how do they keep track of it so we kind of can separate what's real and what's AI? Speaking of which, the White House actually has some plans. I mentioned that some of the general population is a little bit concerned about the idea of AI. I saw a stat yesterday that actually 61% of people, over half of the people, think that AI could actually end humanity. So that's really, really interesting. We can dive into that later. But also something else that's really cool is we found a new device that actually lets deaf people and people who are hard of hearing actually go experience like a live concert and live shows and actually experience it in terms of like vibration. So that's definitely something that we're going to dive deep into today.
Very good stuff. And yeah, that 61% is interesting, especially since I just watched the Arnold Schwarzenegger documentary yesterday. Perfect. Terminator for life, baby. But hey, also for life is the fact that you should just be subscribed for life. That's the best segue I got. I hope you appreciate it.
One click and you're done. One and done.
So make sure you subscribe and click the alerts. Follow us on the podcast platforms. So many of you have been sending us messages. You've been commenting. I'm replying back to those, and we just love to see that. So keep it up. We're here. So if you have questions, comments, anything that you want to throw at us, feel free. We'd love to interact and hear all about your experience, your thoughts. It's not just about us. We want to make sure that we're a sounding board of sorts as well, so that we can keep the conversations going for sure. But, today I'm excited. So I think we just kind of dive in. And I think, honestly, the best way to start this process is, should we go into this? Is the question. I don't know. It's really your call. I could put these up here and we could have breaking news.
Yeah, let's just leave it there. Tell us what the breaking news is, Ryan.
Yeah. We got breaking news in music technology. All right. So we could do this again just because the fat hands are back, baby. The fat hands have returned. All right. You're looking even more Swedish at the moment.
Good.
But
it's the Viking beard.
In any event, you mentioned it already, but Google and OpenAI, which, if you don't know what OpenAI is at this point, just do yourself a favor and make sure that you look it up. They are definitely the titans that started the majority of what's going on right now with ChatGPT and all of that fun stuff. They are actually putting in technology to track AI-generated content. So we're going to talk about that. Like you said, I'm really excited as to how do they get this control? How do they figure this stuff out? How do we monitor this? You also said the Biden administration did some things. So we're going to be digging deep into that as far as regulations based on risk. And then we are going to be doing that really cool device as well. So let's start with this Google and OpenAI, the technology rollout that they're doing. We've often asked ourselves, John, how the heck do we monitor this? How can I tell the difference? In other words, if I listen to version 1 of an artist and it's the actual recording, there is a point at which AI comes up and sounds identical. Maybe now there's some variations. We heard it in the Johnny Cash thing in one of the previous episodes that we can kind of tell some slight differences, but shockingly not that many. It's just like small nitpicks that are happening. So how do we determine what the difference is? Well, Google and OpenAI, with the help of the administration, the Biden administration, are now discussing the idea of what we all call watermarks. So I know a lot of you, if you go onto Google and you search for an image, you see these little watermarks from the company that owns the image. And they're all over the place so that if you use it, they know you took it and they know you're using it and it's there and it's not licensed. You didn't pay to use it. But there's a way to do that digitally. And it's by storing data in the file. So what they're wanting to roll out, John, is this digital imprint, so to speak. They're calling it a payload, that it'll carry this payload that will be nearly impossible to remove. And it'll be a small bit of information on there. It won't take up much space. But where it's going to come from and originate from are the AI generating companies and platforms and technology. So OpenAI, if you want to create an image with OpenAI's technology, they are the ones that regulate the actual watermark digitally that happens. So there's really no way around it unless you're using platforms that don't use watermarks or your own at this point. So we'll get into that a little bit here into like does this really stop the fact that you can still do it? Aren't there going to be other companies that don't regulate it? But let's talk about the companies that are regulating it. Let's get your feedback and input here on what's happening with Google and OpenAI with the watermark, my friend. Go for it.
Yeah, so I mean, with the watermark, I think what we're talking about is basically like a digital stamp. You can't see anything; it's just a piece of the file or something included with the file that goes along with it, right?
Yep.
So what's interesting about this is exactly what I talked about on a couple of episodes back, that they're going to start being able to identify and segment the pieces of content or whatever it is that are created by AI and the ones that aren't. And in terms of being able to track it and being able to actually imprint this watermark, this is something that I also said, which is I thought that government and big tech, of course, as they always do, will kind of come together and control the production process in a sense that if you go through one of the big production plants, if you will, like OpenAI or Midjourney or anything that is generating AI content, and it's a very commercialized, let's just say company, I guess, then they will probably be regulated in the sense that legally they have to put this stamp, put this watermark on this AI generated content. So that's kind of pretty much exactly what I was alluding to. And now look, they're already doing it. So there's a couple of things about this. You mentioned, will everybody be doing this? Everybody meaning all of the companies? And the answer is, I think, is of course not. Because in any society at any time, there have always been people who follow the rules, and then there's a small segment of the population who doesn't follow the rules. Like bootlegging, for example, when prohibition existed in the United States, there's always that counterculture, or subculture of people who do something illegal, even if it's. I'm not saying illegal as in it's good or bad. That's a completely different topic.
Yeah.
But I think there will be people who are able to create their own AI content generating programs, if you will. I don't know if they can control that, but there are a lot of smart people around. They're going to figure out a way around it. I think it will just remain a small piece of the puzzle, so to speak. But outside of that, going back to the big companies. So the big companies being able to have this stamp that if anything that, quote, the masses, and the masses is by definition almost everybody, because almost everybody will do the easiest thing possible. What's the easiest thing possible? Going to Google and searching for whatever is the easiest AI tool to use for, let's say, generating music or generating images or generating programs or whatever it is. So by definition, the masses will have these stamps. All the AI generated content will have this watermark on it. So my actual question, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, is there's a reason that they're doing this, and it allows. It's almost. I know this sounds strange, but I almost view this as they're tagging cows in the field, like putting a tag on their ear, so you can tell who's who. And that's really interesting because I have to ask the question, why? Why are they segmenting the content? What do you think?
I mean, for me, I think multiple things. One, I'll talk to a point that you made. Yeah, I think that there will be people, companies, products, programs that don't listen to this. If anybody really wants to go deep into the world of non-regulated stuff, just look up, don't go to, but look up the concept and learn about the dark web and the deep web, right? It exists. It's booming and it happens. They actually have their own version on there of a chat GPT, which is completely open to any question, any information, anything. And I think the example I saw was somebody asking on the deep web, what is the IP address of the CIA in the deep web? Because they have dark web and deep web IPs so that they could track stuff there. And it was like, hold on, here it is. And like it just pulled the CIA's IP address, right? Just so there are people out there that will obviously go, man, forget that regulation. Who needs that? But it is going to be a small percentage for sure. And I think, human wise, just humans in general, the majority of us don't want to be touching that. We want to make sure that we're helping facilitate positivity and the right things and the legal actions. And we want to make sure that we're following the way that we should, just for moral sake, right? So I think that that's a big one. So as far as why are they doing this, I could see it going multiple ways. I could see it going, obviously, legality is a big one. We've been hearing all these news stories about the big record companies and companies starting to show concern that things are going to be stolen. You're not going to be able to tell the difference. We're going to lose money. And potentially there's that financial side from them already being in with the government and the big tech companies that we know. I mean, I'm not saying in a negative way. I'm just saying they support them quite a bit financially, right? So it's in their best interest to do so. So it could be an easy way for them to see an out. Like, this thing's growing, but we'll make you guys happy by making sure we can have a distinction between the two, if that'll help. But the other side of me that goes a little deeper in my thought process is that there's got to be some kind of like performance reporting tracking going on in the background for this. And by that, I mean, ultimately they want to be like, how many people are listening to this compared to other music? Who is listening to this compared to other music? When we think about something as simple as the iPhone, and we realize that, I don't know if anybody gets creeped out by like technology and how it sees you, just pause and just skip a couple minutes ahead. If not, stick around. If you ever look at the iPhone that has the facial recognition on your phone, and you look at it in like, I don't know, an infrared or a night vision view, we have cameras here in our home. And every now and then when I'm like, hey, what happened? What fell in the living room? Let me look. It takes your photo. It scans your face every 5 seconds, regardless of if you're trying to unlock your phone or an app or anything. You can always see this little light, boop, blink, and scan your face from the actual camera that does a face scan. And that alone, that kind of concept and idea makes you start going, why do they need that? Like, why? What are they doing? There's a purpose behind that, obviously. Is that for advertising later? Do they want to know when we feel sad? And like when we are smiling, when we're angry? Do they want... So all the time, there are all these things going on that are never spoken. And it's just there to collect data and potentially use for the future. So for me, I think them tracking this stuff is all based on the usability, who's using it, how are they using it, what's happening with it, just so that they can separate the two clearly and start to track what is actually happening with the users and what's being put out there, and ultimately have a better way for more regulations or more promotion or whatever it may be. So I have a feeling that it's it's a tracking source so that they could see what the heck is happening with it and the people listening to it.
Yeah, I think that's true. I won't go into what we think the motivations behind all that are because they definitely have a plan.
Mm-hmm.
But let's go back to the music side of things. So if you remember from a few episodes ago, I talked about the idea of them basically being able to distinguish and track what's AI generated versus what's real. And for an artist to be able to have the option to either say, no, I don't want any AI, anything, nobody
Yeah.
can use my likeness, nobody can do anything like that. Or they can, like, let's say, go to their iPhone and it's not really going to be on their iPhone, but I mean, they can just like flip a little switch, right? And say, yes, I want to opt into this capability and
Yeah.
people can use my likeness and it will be that. So what we're talking about here, I think, is just a stepping stone that will actually enable that functionality of what I'm talking about right now.
Smart. Yeah, and that makes sense too. It definitely makes sense. It's definitely a more positive outlook than I gave. So
Yeah.
so it's good.
CIA, IP, and everything,
I went dark, man. Yeah. It's I think just like anything though, right? All of it, we've talked about it every episode basically. All of it is going to be used for good.
Sure.
And all of it is going to be used for potential negatives. Sure, the good will
Yep.
outweigh it, I'm sure, but it's there. If it's available, you could use it however you wish. So I do feel like that is the case. And it's also a really easy way for those that say, no, you're not allowed to use my stuff to bring about some real quick lawsuits and be able to actually pursue the legal action that they've been threatening if people are to do that. Which is interesting because this is, again, directly from Google and OpenAI. But more companies are involved too. I mean, outside of just that, this digital watermark kind of movement, the payload they're calling it, the White House also set out to make commitments from some of the big tech companies out there, even further than this, to manage risks. You mentioned the risk assessment and the fact that 61% of people say that they feel it's going to be the end of humanity, which is so interesting to hear that stat. And again, watch an Arnold documentary of the Terminator and just be in that brain. But in these conversations that the Biden administration has had and the White House has had, they also announced that it was negotiating and had negotiated an agreement with 7 leading AI companies. So with that, they voluntarily commit to adhere to a set of practices designed to allay some of the concerns that have been raised about the rapid evolution of AI. So when we talk about what we just did with this digital watermark, that's just one thing that they have now committed to being able to do. So it's so crazy to me, man. We 2 months ago are talking about there's no regulation. Like, well, it's completely free. Freedom is here for AI. And in that small time frame, we have the White House negotiating commitments with the big tech companies specifically about AI because of the risk that people are seeing in 2 months time, just because it's starting to grow so much. But yeah, companies like Amazon, Google, Meta, Microsoft, OpenAI, all of those companies have vowed to uphold the highest standards to ensure the innovation doesn't come at the expense of Americans' rights and safety. So what are your thoughts?
Well, honestly, one of my thoughts is it absolutely will come at the expense of Americans' rights and safety on purpose from all those big companies, but that's a completely different topic. So, yeah, I mean, I think number one on the stat that I mentioned about people being afraid that AI is going to end humanity, that's not surprising to me because if you go to a horror movie, if you go to the theater and watch a horror movie, everybody in the theater is going to get scared at some point. It's just how people react. It's just fear, right? It's this idea that this, automatic robot computer thing will just take over and wipe everybody out. I mean, nobody is saying, here's exactly how it would happen, or very, very few people. But the majority of people out there haven't heard an explanation. They're just afraid about it. So it's not surprising to me. I would honestly estimate that it might be like 75% of people or something like that. But in terms of this is all about regulation, right? So in terms of the big companies getting together with the government, that's nothing new. But talking about where are the boundaries of, quote, safety, the expense of what you said of, Americans' rights or safety. I mean, there's a lot we could talk about there, who determines where those boundaries are, but also as it relates to music, that's kind of what I want to get into here, because there's a lot of stuff that we could talk about regarding this whole AI thing. I think what it sounds like is they're trying to keep a lid on the container so it doesn't explode, whatever that means, whatever they see the risks being. But let's go back to the music side of things with what we've been talking about today in previous episodes. So the general, I guess you would say, conundrum, or the situation that musicians find themselves in, especially established artists, is the ability for nobodies to rip them off and profit from it. So how do you think that these kind of regulations, or that these kind of, let's say, boundaries will maybe assist in that process, or how could it change that process? What are your thoughts?
I don't know. I think I look at this and I'm like, is that really what they're thinking about though? Yeah, so like you give me that question and I'm like, I don't know. Is that really the consideration at this point? Because I look at this again as kind of like a separate thing. They obviously want to show that they're regulating, and they
Mm-hmm.
are building regulations because a majority of Americans are terrified of what's happening here. But they don't. The only thing they have in mind is appeasing that. In my thought, like they just want to make sure they're like, we did it. There you go. I hope you enjoy that we worked on something. But at the same time, they have no thought or concern, in my opinion, at this point, at least, in the impact overall to just your everyday musicians. Now, maybe some of those big billionaire musicians that have like really made it in business and contribute to a lot of the bottom lines of these companies.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, they want to protect that asset that they have. So they're going to
Mm-hmm.
regulate to make sure that the asset they have invested
Makes
in
sense.
isn't stolen by the little guys. But when
Yep.
you're talking about the independent artists, that's like, I just released an album. I hope 1,000 people download it. They don't care.
Oh yeah, not at all.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, I think it's just, it all comes down to, one, making sure that they're getting in front of it so that people feel like they have their best interest, which I'm not saying everybody at those companies doesn't. I'm never saying that. I'm saying that some of them don't. Some of them do. Some of them don't. But they don't care about that. They care about protecting the assets that are coming
Mm-hmm.
and are contributing to their company, their income, but also the ability for them to have these conversations. Just the fact that the White House goes to your company and is like, you are somebody we need to negotiate with and get commitments from. Like that alone is like, you're big time. I mean, you're like, there's no chance that it's just by chance that they're reaching out to you. So you matter in terms of bottom line for impact in the government and your contributions, especially people like Google and anybody that's able to search. So I think it's all about just making sure they're getting in front of it, saying, hey, we're on it. Don't be scared anymore. You could still use our things so that we can benefit, the government can benefit,
Mm-hmm.
all of us can. But also at the same time, we're going to do these regulations because we have a lot of money in the assets that we've built over the years that we want to make sure continue to deliver money on our investment as well.
And I think that's the bottom line, pun intended. That brings a quote to mind. I don't know who said it first, but the idea that those who have the gold make the rules. It's been the same thing throughout history. If you study any history, it's always the same story. So I think what you're hitting on right now is literally the nail on the head. They already have assets. They want to protect those assets, and they want to make rules and like regulation around those to make sure that they can keep profiting from. That's it.
Yeah, heard, agree. And it'll be interesting to see how all of this rolls out as we continue to go, because you're going to see a lot of other people challenging the system and regulations, not just like in a legal battle, but in technology, right? The moment there is a set of 10 regulations, it takes 2 minutes for somebody to find an 11th, a 12th, a 13th. And they start to find all the corners they can cut and all the ways to go between the lines. So it'll be interesting to see how effectively it rolls out versus how long this process is going to take for them to actually pin it all down before it does get out of control. I think they are definitely on top of that. They don't want to lose the interest of the population. Absolutely not. So they want to make sure that they are on top of it so that we trust them, which we should be able to, ideally, that they're managing that. So, that's really all the AI stuff, the tech stuff, the craziness that's going on with the White House. I wanted to bring something else to the table, though, something a little more fun and fun loving. and exciting. So I know we want to really bring to the table a lot of stuff we have in the past. We've talked about other platforms, music wise, that allow us to write music with technology, play music, gear. I have a really good friend of mine named Travis. He is in Maryland. He's on the actual Maryland government, and he works with accessibility for the deaf. So he himself is deaf, and really builds a lot of startups in the deaf community to help assist. And ironically, it's just ironically, nothing's ironic, all right? Ironically, yesterday I had a conversation with him, and then this news story pops up. So I wanted to bring it to the table to have a conversation about how technology helps those who don't get to enjoy music as we all take for granted actually start to enjoy music in the same way or slightly different ways. So there's a company that came out. They developed this actual suit almost. It's like a vest that has 24 vibrating touch points within the vest. And it's the Vibro Textile is the actual technology. It's developed by Not Impossible Labs. It's a hard one to say, but it's Not Impossible Labs. And each of them have 24 separate touch points, like I mentioned. So the idea behind this is that when somebody that's hard of hearing or is deaf goes to a concert now, they have 24 potential inputs that they can feel within their body. And the goal isn't just to have all 24 going. So it's just like total sensory overload. It's that they could go and enjoy the orchestra if they want to. They have an entire, a violin section in one sensor. They have the drum section in another sensor. And the technology itself is amazing to me. But what the real topic here is that I want to chat through, I'm amazed this didn't exist. But I can't believe that we focus so much on the hearing and people that have full accessibility and can fully use every sense that we have. And does that mean that we're forgetting a group like the deaf community? In all of this developing technology that's happening for music, are they being left behind slightly? Because this seems like something so easy to me that it's like seeing this as a new release, a new news article. I'm like, what? This wasn't something? What did they do when they like go to a concert? They don't enjoy it? Why are we here in 2023 where this is what we're talking about? So two things I want to chat through is, do we feel like we're too focused on certain segments of humanity and we're forgetting some in this growth of technology in music and tech in general? And do we feel like we should be focusing more on humanity as a whole and making sure that we're using all of this technology for good? But then even further, do we think that this is something that starts to extend beyond it? Is that now people are going, oh man, we should be focused on this. So are we going to start seeing more improvement and more work done for the accessibility of the deaf and the hard of hearing in music tech? Just very interesting. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, man.
Yeah, so there's three main things here, which I want to address that what you said. And the first one is, as far as this being news now, it is surprising to me as well, because I would have assumed that something like this would have come out 20 years ago, or more. It just seems logical. It just seems like a natural step for, like you say, accessibility. For those of us who don't have issues in that department, we really don't keep up with it, or I would imagine most people don't keep up with things like that, other than what they have to interact with, maybe at a hotel or something like that. But again, this is just something that seems odd. I would have assumed that something like this would have existed a long time ago. There's actually another thing I want to chat about too before I hand it back to you. But to answer your questions, as far as leaving a segment behind, honestly, the way I see it is that most of the developments in history are done by individuals or companies for the sake of, profiting from it. And I don't mean that in a bad way, or it's not it's just a word, right? It's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just how societies have been built. And if statistically, I don't mean to be cold about this, but statistically, people who are hard of hearing or especially deaf are probably the majority of people don't have some kind of an issue that is impairing enough to where they might have to wear a vest or something like that.
Mhm.
Therefore, the biggest section of the market are those other people. So most of the developments that we see are always developed for the biggest segments of the market, or the segments of the market that can be profited from the most. So I think it's just a natural evolution of development.
Yeah.
Again, there's nothing good or bad about that. It just is. It just is what it is. That's my view on it. As far as will we see more development in the areas where we're not leaving, segments of the population behind? Maybe, but at the end of the day, what has driven society forward is going to continue driving society forward. So I don't really see that changing very much. And in fact, there's a quote that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, or past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. So the fact that we're talking about this in 2023 and we're just now seeing this vest thing come out, I don't see any reason why it would ever change, at least for the foreseeable future of this area of innovation continuing to lag, because
Sure.
where is the incentive to do that? And as Charlie Munger says, the world is driven by incentives. And it's just the truth, right? It's just how things work. So, in terms of the actual vest itself, this is a little bit, I want to take this a little bit different, down a different path. I don't know if you've ever seen what's called a vibe plate, or in physics,
Mhm.
they do these experiments where they have for those of you who haven't seen this, you basically have a metal plate that's like a table, and you attach some kind of a cable to it, or so you clip a cable or something that's a frequency generator. And what it does is it vibrates the plate. And what you do is you should really look this up if you haven't on YouTube, a vibe plate. But you pour sand on it, and as you increase the frequency, the sand, because of the sound pressure in the room, it changes shapes, and it makes these interesting looking patterns. Sometimes they look like snowflakes, sometimes they look like spirograph type things. It's really, really fascinating how that works. And these shapes, these really organized shapes, is actually what we have around us all the time when we're hearing and listening to music. So number one, that's really fascinating. And the reason I bring that up is because I would assume that, let's say I'm deaf, I can still feel something, with my skin. I still have uh, senses in terms of like sound pressure and things like that. So if I go to a concert, I would imagine I can still feel the bass. I can still feel the different modes, which
Mhm.
is what those shapes are, of when let's say a guitar player is playing versus when something else is playing, or a very driving bass section or something like that. I would imagine I can still feel those different modes of air pressure around my body to kind of enjoy a concert a little bit. So what's interesting to me is that they have these 24 different touch points, and I just have to wonder, number one, how is that different? I'm not saying that it's not, but how is that different than just feeling the natural air in the room, the
Mhm.
vibration of the air in the room? And also, you mentioned an orchestra and having like the percussion section in one of these touch points. So is this like a musical massage type thing? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's one of those things that I would never try outside of I should. Like I feel like I should really actually give it a go because I have no
Hmm.
idea. Because I've never been in the brain space to be like, this is something that happens. This
Yeah.
is, I've been blessed and fortunate enough to not have to think about this. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't try it out to see. So I think that it's just one of those situations where we should try one. We should go find it and see what it's like, report back. But I also want to say 2 points. One, talking about your patterns, right?
Hmm.
Well, I understand what you're talking about. A lot of times it's like, is it a mandala like kind of shape, right?
Hmm.
A lot of people get those tattoos. I don't have one. But I actually saw last week where somebody took sounds from nature and did the same experiment, had those mandala shapes out, found three of them, and like actually took photos of them and
Hmm.
sketched them on trace paper. So you could see through it, aligned a bunch of them, and it actually created the image of a human face. So it's trippy and cool
Yeah.
to think that like the sound and how like it looks visually when we can't
Uh-huh.
see the sound, but the way it visually looks, especially the sound from nature, actually connects with us in terms of humans and just overlaying it and being like, wow, that's kind of weird, but very cool. So I think the big question I have or point that I'd like to make before we conclude here is does this mean if we feel like the development isn't going to continue and it's not going to be as fast paced as all of the other stuff that benefits everyone, should companies that are out here developing this type of technology start to understand ways to make it relevant for everybody? So I put down just a note that what about having this type of tech for everyone? What I mean by that is, why wouldn't we develop these sensors and these actual vests that absolutely are designed to help the hard of hearing and the deaf community actually experience the things they can't experience in life, and be able to do that, but at the same time have use cases for people like you and I, where if we're in VR, we could use this sensor as another sense, another
Mhm.
immersion, so to speak, so that maybe as we're playing through games, we're feeling things pass us. We're feeling sensors triggered. We're
Mhm.
feeling bass and resonance in there in our chest, so that we're feeling like we're more involved. I feel
Yeah.
like that's the missed opportunity, is that it can be multi-use. You just have to appeal to the broader audience, but you can have a segment that it's utilized differently for. And I think maybe that's the way that they need to start seeing this technology so that it hits the mass market.
Um, that's an interesting question, but I really think, just like most things, the answer is it depends. So it depends on, you say the word need. I don't know if we need to do anything. And different companies and different individuals are going to do whatever they think is in their best interest. And let's say the company that's developing or has developed a vest, I mean, maybe their only focus, maybe their only mission is for folks who are hard of hearing or who have, who are deaf, or they want to make a very specific product and go really deep on this particular target market. Maybe that's just their mission. I don't know. Your friend that you mentioned, who is also deaf and who has had, I think you said 11 startups in that space. I mean,
Yeah.
clearly he's focused on that space. He's not necessarily focused on um, broadening the market, so to speak. Maybe that's just not what he's interested in. And if we talk about economics and philosophy, whatever you choose means you're not choosing something else. It's just basic principle of economics. So that maybe if they broaden their scope, if they tried to appeal to the mass market, then they wouldn't be appealing as much to the small market of what we're talking about. So it's hard to say. It's just, I think, again, if you just kind of take a step back and you just watch how things happen, it happens because of what people are driven or incentivized to do. And the way that it's happened in history and the way it's happened before is likely the way it's going to continue to happen. So I don't really see any catalyst for some kind of a big change where, for example, this vest maker would all of a sudden start focusing on the mass market unless his internal driver changed, which is, I just want to make a lot more money, or I just want to appeal to a wider audience, which doesn't seem to be the case.
It's a good point, and I really appreciate that the whole time you had a beautiful thought bubble light
Good.
on your head here. This is good. Well, all good stuff and really exciting. A lot moving as always, and we want to hear about your feelings on it. So, of course, make sure that you're subscribed before you comment. But make sure that you comment. How do you feel about everything that has happened? Literally, I think the oldest story we pulled was from 3 days ago. So it's just moving rapidly. So we'd love to hear your feedback, your feelings, your input. And if you have questions, we'll start bringing them to the podcast as well. But thank you for being here, John. I appreciate you as always, my friend. And I appreciate all of you listening, following, interacting. And we will see you next time on the Future of Music podcast.